The air in the classroom was filled with a tension that Ana Garcia couldn't explain. It wasn't just the usual anxiety of being the new student, something she was already used to after changing schools so many times. No. There was something more. The look she felt around her, that sensation of being under silent, but heavy scrutiny, as if everyone was evaluating her every move. As she walked through the door, clutching her backpack tightly against her chest, she noticed how the conversations gradually died down, until silence became almost absolute. Anna's eyes scanned the classroom. The desks were arranged in neat rows, and most of the students were already seated. They all wore the pristine uniform, with notebooks and books perfectly aligned on their desks. But what caught Anna's attention the most was the teacher, Miss Johnson. Standing in front of the chalkboard, with her rigid posture and stern expression, the teacher seemed like the type of woman who wouldn't tolerate mistakes, let alone interruptions. "Ah, the new student," Miss Johnson said in a distant tone as Anna timidly approached the main desk, handing her the admission slip. Anna tried to smile, but the look she received in return was cold and sharp. Miss Johnson glanced briefly at the slip, without saying another word, before nodding toward the back of the classroom. Anna understood that she was supposed to sit there, in the last row, almost hidden, far from the spotlight. Although she interpreted it as a way of isolating her from the others, she decided not to protest. She was used to being the outsider, but this time felt different. This time, it felt as though her mere presence was breaking some unwritten rule. The students murmured among themselves as Anna settled into her seat. Anna's dark skin and curly hair made her stand out in a school where most students had lighter complexions. As she got comfortable, she felt several eyes on her, but none were accompanied by a welcoming smile. On the contrary, it was as if her mere existence made some of her classmates uncomfortable, though no one dared to say it aloud. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened her notebook, but she was determined not to be intimidated. She had learned to be strong. Class started, and the atmosphere soon became oppressive. Miss Johnson, with her authoritative tone, began talking about the book they would be discussing over the next few weeks, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, a book Anna knew well. She had read the book twice and had strong opinions about its themes of racism, justice, and morality. When the teacher mentioned the central theme of the book, the trial of a black man falsely accused of raping a white woman, something stirred inside Anna. She felt this was an important opportunity to speak, to share her perspective. With a mixture of excitement and nerves, Anna raised her hand. She did it slowly, hoping Miss Johnson would notice. But the teacher, after a brief glance, continued speaking, ignoring her completely. Anna's eyes swept across the room, seeing how some of her classmates watched her, but said nothing. The tension in her shoulders grew, but she refused to lower her hand. She wanted to be heard. Finally, after what felt like endless minutes, Miss Johnson sighed and looked at her with a tired expression. "Yes," she said, her tone filled with impatience. "Anna, right?" Anna quickly nodded, feeling the pressure of every eye in the class on her. She had been waiting for this moment, but now, with the teacher looking at her with such disdain, she felt like every word had to be chosen carefully. I think the novel shows how racism isn't just a personal attitude, but something deeper," she began, trying to sound as clear as possible. "It's about how racism is structured in society, in the laws, and affects people in ways that are invisible to some but obvious to others." Anna couldn't finish her sentence. Miss Johnson interrupted her, something she clearly did often when students said something that didn't align with her view of the world. "I understand what you're trying to say, Anna," the teacher said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "but I think you're misinterpreting a bit. This book was written a long time ago, and although it deals with important topics, we shouldn't project our current struggles onto it. Remember, Harper Lee was writing from another era. You may be bringing too modern and politicized a view to what the book is really trying to say. Anna's heart stopped for a moment. The teacher's words not only invalidated her opinion, but also reduced her to a caricature. She implied that Anna couldn't understand the book without distorting it through her own experience, as if her story, her perspective, wasn't relevant. Humiliation swirled in her chest, but the worst part was that Miss Johnson didn't even seem to realize the damage she was causing. The silence in the classroom was deafening. No one moved. The other students stared at her, waiting to see how she would react. Anna felt the temptation to defend herself, to explain that her point was valid, that her interpretation of systemic racism wasn't something she was imposing on the text, but a legitimate reading. But she also knew that if she openly challenged the teacher, it would only make things worse. So, she swallowed her pride and nodded silently, lowering her gaze to her notebook. She could feel tears welling up behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. This would be only the first of many battles. Miss Johnson, satisfied with her own comment, continued the class as if nothing had happened, but Anna knew something had changed. Not just for her, but for everyone in that classroom. Some of her classmates looked at her with a mixture of pity and curiosity, while others simply ignored the exchange. But Anna realized in that moment that Miss Johnson wasn't just a strict teacher. She was a barrier, a figure of authority who wasn't interested in listening or learning from a different perspective. As the rest of the class went on, Anna couldn't stop thinking about the injustice she had just witnessed. She knew that silence wasn't an option, but she also understood that she would have to choose very carefully when and how to raise her voice. Resistance, though silent for now, was stirring inside her. Anna decided that her place wouldn't be in the shadows, nor would she be silenced. What Miss Johnson didn't know was that this fight wouldn't end in that classroom. The next day began like any other, with the routine of classes moving slowly. However, for Ana Garcia, the atmosphere in the school had grown heavier since the day before. As she walked through the halls, she felt the stares follow her, watching her in silence. Some of her classmates whispered to each other, and although she couldn't hear the exact words, she knew they were talking about her, about how Miss Johnson had humiliated her in front of everyone. Anna arrived early to class, sitting again in the back of the room, in the same seat she had been assigned the previous day. As she pulled out her books, the door opened, and Miss Johnson entered, with her same stern expression. Anna tried not to make eye contact, but something in the air indicated that the situation wouldn't be any different. The teacher began the class, this time asking students to share their opinions about the book To Kill a Mockingbird. Apparently, the topic of racial injustice would continue to dominate the discussions. "I want to hear your opinions," Miss Johnson said, walking between the rows of students. "It's a book about morality, justice, and racial differences. But remember, it's a literary text, not a political pamphlet." Anna pressed her lips together. That was clearly a jab at her, a veiled warning that any opinion touching on modern political issues would be treated the same way hers had been the day before. Several students raised their hands, but Anna remained silent, watching as her classmates offered superficial analyses, focused more on the book's plot than on the deeper themes Harper Lee had tried to address. At one point, a girl named Laura raised her hand and said, "I think the character of Atticus Finch represents the ideal of justice. He defends Tom Robinson because he believes everyone deserves a fair trial, regardless of their skin color. I like to think that in our society, we don't have that kind of racism anymore. Things have changed a lot since the book was written." Anna felt a wave of frustration as she listened to Laura's words. Things hadn't changed that much, not for her, not for many. She took a deep breath and, without thinking much, raised her hand. Miss Johnson glanced at her but decided to ignore her again, giving the floor to another student. Santiago, a tall boy sitting near the window, spoke in a confident tone, "I agree with Laura. I think we've made a lot of progress as a society. It's important to see the book as something that reflects the past, not the present." Anna's heart began to beat faster. She couldn't let this class end without saying what she thought. She raised her hand again, this time more firmly. Miss Johnson had no choice but to look at her, although the expression on her face made it clear she wasn't happy to give her the floor. "Anna," the teacher said in a calculated voice, "do you want to share something?" All the eyes in the classroom turned toward her. The feeling of nervousness settled in her stomach, but Anna had already decided she wouldn't back down this time. She wouldn't let her voice be silenced. "I don't agree with the idea that racism in To Kill a Mockingbird is just a thing of the past," she began, trying to stay calm. "What the book shows is that racism is embedded in institutions. Even today, many people face the same kind of prejudices and inequalities that are seen in the story. Justice isn't always blind, and people are still judged by the color of their skin." A heavy silence fell over the room. Anna could feel how some of her classmates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others looked at her with curiosity, as if they couldn't believe she dared to speak like that. Miss Johnson, however, didn't look surprised. Instead, her expression hardened even more. "That may be your personal experience, Anna," Miss Johnson replied, each word sharper than the last, "but we must remember that this is a book, a work of fiction. We can't take it as an exact representation of modern reality. It's not fair to impose our current struggles onto a text that belongs to an." Anna felt the teacher's words like a punch. But what hurt the most was how her classmates seemed to accept what Miss Johnson said without question. To them, the discussion seemed to be over, and what she had just said was nothing more than a discordant note in a conversation they didn't want to have. Anna kept her gaze down, but inside her mind was racing. She knew Miss Johnson was wrong, that her attempt to silence conversations about modern racism only proved how relevant the issue still was. Anna hadn't come to this school to be invisible, and if the teacher thought she could discourage her with condescending comments, she was very mistaken. After class, some classmates approached her in the hallways. Laura, the same one who had spoken about Atticus Finch's ideal justice, caught up with her as she was gathering her things at her locker. "Hey, Anna," she said in a low voice, "what you said in class, it was brave." "I'm not sure I agree, but it was brave." Anna looked at her for a moment, trying to gauge whether those words were sincere or just a polite way of saying she didn't understand. Laura shrugged and walked away before Anna could respond. But it wasn't just Laura. Some boys from the class walked past her, murmuring things Anna couldn't fully make out, but they were definitely about her. Walking down the hallway toward her next class, Anna felt the weight of what she was facing was greater than she had anticipated. It wasn't just about a teacher with outdated ideas, but an entire school that seemed unwilling to question the current state of things. But even though her voice hadn't been fully heard, she wouldn't be discouraged. Anna was used to battles. She had gone through many before, and although the battle at this school was just beginning, she was ready for what was to come. She knew she would need to be strong, both mentally and emotionally, because the silent resistance she had started inside herself would soon need to become more visible. As she walked to her next class, with her head held higher, she decided that she wouldn't let Miss Johnson, or anyone else, silence her voice. The battle was far from over. Anna could hardly believe what she was seeing. Her father, Daniel Morales, was there, standing in the hallway of her school. The sight of her father, the school principal, completely took her by surprise. It wasn't the first time he had visited the institution where he worked, but she had never seen him so out of his usual role before. It was as if two parts of her life, carefully separated until now, collided in that instant. Other time and place. Daniel looked at her with concern, and seeing the confusion on her face, he changed his expression to something softer. He knew something wasn't right, he could feel it in the way his daughter was looking at him. Anna tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come out. She was still processing the encounter with Miss Johnson, the tensions of the last few days, and now this. She wanted to tell him everything, but the emotions piled up in her chest, choking any attempt to explain herself. Daniel watched her for another moment before stepping toward her. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a gesture he had always used to calm her since she was little. "Anna, what's going on here?" His voice was soft, but firm. He didn't seem angry, but the weight of the authority he represented as the principal was unmistakable. Anna lowered her gaze, trying to find the right words. Everything that had happened with Miss Johnson, the contempt in her words, the constant condescension. She knew she should speak up, but the fear of seeming whiny or weak stopped her. She didn't want her father to think she couldn't handle things on her own. "Dad, it's just that, it's not easy here," she finally began, not really knowing how to continue. "Miss Johnson, she doesn't seem to want to hear what I have to say. We talked about To Kill a Mockingbird, and when I tried to discuss the topic of racism, she cut me off. Like my opinion didn't matter." Daniel frowned when he heard the teacher's name. Miss Johnson was known for her strictness and for following the rules rigidly, but she had never shown openly problematic behavior in front of him. However, he knew his daughter well. He knew Anna didn't exaggerate things. Daniel's expression changed. His concern mixed with a spark of discomfort. He was the principal of that school, and he knew that any conflict between his daughter and the teachers would be complicated to handle. But he was also a father, and he couldn't ignore what Anna was telling him. "Let's go to my office," he said finally, his voice firmer this time. Anna followed him in silence, walking through the empty hallways that now seemed even longer and narrower. Miss Johnson's words still echoed in her head, but now that her father was involved, everything seemed to take on a new dimension. When they reached the office, Daniel sat behind his desk, but this time not as a principal, but as a worried father trying to find a solution. Anna sat in front of him, feeling a little more secure with the door closed, away from the inquisitive looks of her classmates. "Tell me exactly what happened," Daniel asked, his eyes fixed on his daughter's. "I don't want guesses, I want to know how you felt and what Miss Johnson said." Anna took a deep breath and began to explain. She detailed every moment of the classes, from the looks of her classmates to the subtly hurtful comments from the teacher. Her voice trembled a little as she recalled how Miss Johnson had silenced her, how she had made it seem like talking about racism was inappropriate, an unnecessary distraction. As she spoke, Daniel listened in silence, his face impassive but his eyes betraying when Anna finished speaking. There was a long silence in the room. Daniel leaned forward, crossing his hands on the desk, thinking about what he should do. He knew he couldn't just ignore what had happened. But he also knew that any action he took would have consequences. Miss Johnson wasn't just any teacher. She had years of experience, a solid reputation, and was respected by the school board. Confronting her would mean risking many things, but not confronting her would mean leaving Anna unprotected. "I'm going to talk to her," Daniel said finally. "This can't go on. I don't care how experienced she is, I'm not going to tolerate anyone treating my daughter, or any student, like that. Anna looked at him with a mix of relief and concern. She knew her father was taking a risk by stepping in, but she also knew it was necessary. Her struggle wasn't just personal, it was something much bigger. And although she feared what would come next, she knew she wasn't alone. The next day came quickly. Anna arrived at school early, but this time, with a different feeling. She knew something was about to change. As she walked toward her class, she saw her father in the distance entering the teacher's lounge. It was the moment she had both feared and anticipated at the same time. Miss Johnson didn't take long to enter the classroom. Her usually unshakable expression showed slight tension. Without making eye contact with Anna, she began the class as usual. But the tension in the air was palpable. Anna knew her father had spoken to her. What she didn't know was how that conversation would affect the rest of her time at school. As the hours passed, Anna realized that something fundamental had changed. Although Miss Johnson didn't mention anything directly, her attitude was different. She no longer openly ignored or interrupted her. However, the furtive glances and whispers among some classmates increased. Anna felt that something bigger was at play, something she didn't fully understand yet. Her battle had just begun, but for the first time, she felt things were moving in a different direction. The day dragged on. Anna, still with her heart in her throat after telling her father what had happened, tried to concentrate on her classes, but she knew that what really mattered was happening outside the classroom. Daniel Morales, her father and the school principal, was facing Miss Johnson, and although Anna didn't know how that conversation would end, something told her things wouldn't be the same. Lunchtime arrived. Anna walked alone to the cafeteria, while the whispers of her classmates continued, though now they seemed filled with new curiosity. Some looked at her more than usual, as if something in the air had changed since the last time they had sat together in that classroom. Miss Johnson's words, always condescending, weighed on Anna like a dark cloud that wouldn't dissipate. When she reached the line to get her food, she felt someone watching her. She looked up and saw Laura, the same girl who had made the comment about Atticus Finch the day before. Laura approached her, though cautiously, as if unsure whether she should speak or not. "Hey!" Laura started, her voice low, almost a whisper. "I heard your dad talk to Miss Johnson this morning." Anna tensed immediately. She knew the news would spread quickly, but hearing it from someone else made her feel exposed. She didn't respond, waiting to see what else Laura had to say. A mix of emotions. "Some say she's upset. That she didn't like being confronted like that." Laura looked around, making sure no one was too close to listen. "Just, be careful, Anna. Miss Johnson isn't the type to stay quiet. If she thinks someone is challenging her, she's going to do something about it." Anna nodded, though she wasn't sure what to say. She knew Laura wasn't being malicious, but her words only confirmed what she already feared. Her father may have taken a firm stand, but Miss Johnson wasn't the type of person who accepted criticism without a fight. Anna had sensed the change in the teacher's attitude during the morning classes, but now she understood that the change wasn't necessarily a positive one. During lunch, Anna remained silent, barely touching the food on her tray. The whispers around her didn't stop, and although her classmates didn't confront her directly, the atmosphere was uncomfortable. She knew some of them would side with Miss Johnson. After all, many at that school didn't understand what it was like to be in her shoes, what it meant to face something as ingrained as racism in every little detail of daily life. When lunch was over, she decided to go outside, where she could get some fresh air. She needed to clear her mind before returning to class. She sat on a bench, under the shade of a large tree, watching from afar as some students played basketball on the court. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to calm herself, but the thoughts kept piling up in her mind. It didn't take long before someone approached her. Anna opened her eyes, sensing the presence of someone next to her. It was Santiago, the boy who had spoken in class supporting the idea that racism was a thing of the past. He stood in front of her, his hands in his pockets and an expression she couldn't decipher. "Can we talk for a moment?" Santiago said, his tone not aggressive, but not friendly either. Anna nodded slowly, wondering what he wanted from her. Santiago sat down next to her but kept a small distance, as if he didn't want to get too close. "Listen," he started, his gaze fixed on the ground, "I know I said some things in class yesterday that maybe you didn't like. But it's nothing personal. I just think differently." Anna observed him in silence. She hadn't expected Santiago to approach her to talk about this. After all, he had been one of the first to support the idea that racism was no longer a problem, something that had deeply frustrated her. "I know, Santiago. I don't expect everyone to think like me," Anna said calmly, "but that doesn't mean racism has disappeared. For many people, it's still a real thing, something they face every day." Santiago was quiet for a moment, as if processing her words. Finally, he looked up and met her gaze. "I can't say I know what it feels like. I haven't gone through the same things as you, that's clear," he admitted, with an honesty that surprised Anna. "I just want you to know that I wasn't trying to minimize what you said. Sometimes, we just don't understand things until we experience them." Anna nodded, this time with a slight smile. Although Santiago didn't share her experience, at least he was trying to understand. And that was already an important step. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "I know it's hard to talk about these things, but it's necessary." Santiago stood up, putting his hands back in his pockets. "I guess it is," he said with a half-smile before walking away toward the basketball court. Anna watched him as he walked away, feeling a slight relief. Maybe not everyone at that school fully understood her, but some people were willing to listen. And that gave her strength to keep going. As the bell rang, signaling the end of recess, Anna returned to her classroom, mentally preparing herself for what would come next. She knew Miss Johnson wouldn't forget so easily what had happened between them. That morning's conversation with her father had likely stirred up more things than Anna could foresee. Back in class, Miss Johnson seemed more restrained than before, but Anna wasn't fooled. There was something in the way the teacher glanced at her sideways, as if waiting for Anna to make the slightest mistake. The minutes passed slowly, and although the class proceeded normally, Anna knew that calm wouldn't last long. And then it happened. Near the end of the lesson, Miss Johnson addressed the class in a louder voice, breaking the monotony of the reading. "Before you leave, I have an announcement," she said, looking at all the students. "Starting next week, Principal Morales will personally be reviewing the academic progress of some students. This will include additional evaluations and behavior reviews in class." Anna felt a chill run down her spine. The way Miss Johnson said it, the emphasis she placed on the word behavior, was a disguised warning. It wasn't just a coincidence that this announcement came right after her father's intervention. Miss Johnson was sending a subtle threat, reminder that she had her own ways of exerting power. Anna's eyes met Miss Johnson's for a brief second, and in that silent exchange, Anna knew the battle wasn't over. On the contrary, it had just begun. Anna left the classroom with Miss Johnson's announcement echoing in her mind. It hadn't been an innocent notice, she knew that. Those words, disguised as an administrative statement, were a direct threat to her. Her father would be reviewing the behavior of some students, and although it hadn't been said openly, Anna felt the comment was specifically aimed at her. Miss Johnson wouldn't leave her alone so easily, that much was clear. The day continued with a tense calm. Anna tried to focus on her other classes, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. She felt her classmates' eyes on her more than ever. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with what seemed like disapproval, but what unsettled her the most was the indifference of the majority. Despite everything that was happening, she still felt invisible to many. No one really cared about what she was facing. By the end of the day, Anna was mentally exhausted. She knew her father was trying to protect her, but at the same time, she realized that his intervention had made things worse. Miss Johnson was more cunning than she had thought, and she was using her position to apply pressure that wasn't easy to fight. As she walked toward the school's exit, she heard someone calling her from behind. It was Sophia, one of the few classmates who had been kind to her since she arrived. Sophia quickly approached, her expression a mix of concern and sympathy. "Anna, listen to me, something's not right," Sophia began, glancing around as if she didn't want anyone else to overhear the conversation. Anna stopped, waiting for Sophia to continue. "I overheard some teachers talking in the staff room. It seems Miss Johnson is moving to file a formal complaint with the school board," Sophia said, her voice low but filled with urgency. "She's saying there are behavior problems in class, insinuating that some students are trying to create unnecessary conflict." Anna felt a stab of anxiety in her stomach. She knew exactly what Sophia was referring to. Miss Johnson wasn't just upset, she was preparing an offensive. "Was she talking about me?" Anna asked, though she already knew the answer. Sophia nodded, biting her lip nervously. She didn't mention any names directly, but she hinted at it. "And if the school board listens to her, they might take disciplinary action. You need to be careful." Anna remained silent for a moment. Sophia's words confirmed what she had been fearing since the moment Miss Johnson humiliated her in class. This wasn't just an academic conflict. The teacher was using her power to silence her, and if Anna wasn't careful, this could turn against her in a much more serious way. "Thanks for telling me, Sophia," Anna finally said, feeling grateful to have at least someone on her side. "Don't worry," Sophia replied with a sympathetic smile. "I just wanted you to know what's happening. Miss Johnson shouldn't get away with this. If you need anything, you know where to find me." Anna nodded before saying goodbye and continuing her way to the school exit. As she walked, her mind raced. The conversation with Sophia made it clear that Miss Johnson wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted. It was a silent war, but the damage it could cause was real. Anna knew her father would do everything he could to protect her, but she was also aware that he could be limited by his role as principal. He couldn't be too obvious in taking her side, not if he wanted to avoid bigger problems with the administration. When she got home, Anna found her father sitting in the living room, reviewing some documents. When he looked up, Anna noticed the exhaustion on his face, but also a determination she hadn't seen before. She knew Daniel had been dealing with Miss Johnson's comments all day. "Dad," Anna began, with some hesitation, "Sophia told me that Miss Johnson is trying to file a formal complaint against me. She's saying I'm a behavior problem." Daniel put the papers aside and looked at her seriously. "Anna, I know what's going on," he replied calmly. "I've heard the rumors. Miss Johnson is a very respected teacher at this school, but that doesn't give her the right to treat you that way. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure her complaint goes nowhere." But you have to be prepared. This could get more complicated before it gets better. Anna nodded, grateful for her father's support, but she also knew she couldn't leave everything in his hands. She would have to take a stand as well, but do so carefully. Any misstep could make the situation worse. "Don't worry about me, Dad. I'm ready for whatever comes," Anna replied, with a confidence that had started to grow inside her. The following days passed without major incidents, but the atmosphere at school remained tense. Anna continued attending class, doing her work, but always with the feeling that something was about to explode. Miss Johnson maintained a facade of professionalism, but Anna could feel that the teacher was watching her more closely than before, looking for any excuse to point out a mistake, no matter how small. One afternoon, while Anna was in the library reviewing some notes for her next class, someone rushed in. It was Santiago, with a worried expression on his face. "Anna, we have a problem," he said, almost out of breath. Anna immediately stood up, feeling the nervousness take hold of her. "What happened?" she asked, her voice louder than she had intended. Santiago looked her directly in the eyes. "Miss Johnson is saying that you've been organizing some students to boycott her classes. They're accusing you of being the leader of a silent protest. She says you've been inciting others to disobey." Anna was in shock. That accusation was completely false, but she knew that if Miss Johnson managed to convince the board it was true, she would be in serious trouble. Anna felt as if the ground was disappearing beneath her feet. Santiago's words echoed in her mind like a drumbeat she couldn't shake. Miss Johnson was accusing her of organizing a protest. Not only was it a blatant lie, but it also put her in an extremely dangerous situation. The school had strict policies against any kind of organized disobedience, and being labeled as the instigator of something like that could bring devastating consequences. How do you know?" Anna asked, trying to process what she had just heard. Santiago ran a hand through his hair, nervous, and lowered his voice, as if he feared someone might overhear them. "I heard it directly from a couple of teachers. Miss Johnson is convinced that you're organizing some students to sabotage her classes. She's using that as an excuse to strengthen her complaint to the school board, and if she manages to convince them, they might take disciplinary action against you." Anna sank into the chair in front of her, the weight of the situation falling on her shoulders like a heavy stone. She knew Miss Johnson was vindictive, but she hadn't anticipated she would go this far. Accusing her of something like this was taking the confrontation to a whole new level. This wasn't just about her relationship with the teacher anymore, it was something much bigger. Now, her future at the school was at stake, and the possibility of facing serious sanctions loomed over her. "I'm not organizing anything," Anna said, more to herself than to Santiago, as she tried to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. Santiago nodded seriously. "I know. I'm not saying it's true, but you need to prepare yourself. Miss Johnson is determined to see you fall, and if you don't have a plan, this could go very badly." Anna took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She had to act fast, but she couldn't afford to make a mistake. She knew her father was on her side, but she also understood that, as principal, he couldn't intervene too directly without risking appearing biased. She needed to find a way to protect herself, but within the rules. If Miss Johnson was playing dirty, she would have to find a way to counter it. "What should I do?" Anna asked, feeling the crushing pressure of the situation. Santiago looked her directly in the eyes, his words carefully measured. "You need proof, something that contradicts what she's saying. Something that shows you have nothing to do with what she's accusing you of. And most importantly, you need allies. If you're alone in this, it'll be easier for them to blame you. Anna nodded, feeling clarity begin to return. Santiago was right. She couldn't afford to react emotionally, she needed to be strategic. She stood up from the chair, her mind already working on possible solutions. "Thank you, Santiago. This means a lot," she said sincerely. Santiago gave a half smile. "You know, I don't agree with everything you said in class, but what they're doing to you isn't fair. If you need anything, I'll be here." Anna watched him walk away, feeling strengthened by Santiago's unexpected support. She wasn't alone, and although the situation seemed dark, she was beginning to see a small light at the end of the tunnel. She knew Miss Johnson wouldn't defeat her so easily. That afternoon, Anna returned home determined to tell her father everything. Daniel Morales was a fair man, and although he was limited by his position as principal, she trusted he would know how to guide her. When she walked into the living room, she found him standing by the window, looking out with a tense expression. Something in his posture told her that he already knew the situation had escalated. "Dad, we need to talk," Anna said, her voice trembling slightly. Daniel turned toward her, his eyes reflecting the same concern she felt. "Anna, I think I already know what you're going to tell me," he began with a deep sigh. "I just heard about the accusation Miss Johnson is making against you." Anna remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I've tried speaking to some members of the school board, but I'm afraid Miss Johnson has more influence than I had anticipated. They're taking what she's saying seriously, and if we don't find a way to disprove it, you could face a sanction." Her father's words, though not a surprise, hit Anna like a bucket of cold water. It wasn't just a baseless accusation, the school board was seriously considering it. "What can I do?" Anna asked, feeling the desperation growing in her chest. Daniel looked at her calmly, but there was a firmness in his tone that gave Anna a bit of comfort. "First, keep a cool head. We can't let you fall into any provocations. Miss Johnson is looking for any excuse to make you seem guilty. Second, as Santiago told you, you need proof. If we can show that the accusations are false, this whole thing will fall apart." Anna nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. It wouldn't be easy, but she wouldn't let Miss Johnson win. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. Anna dedicated herself to gathering anything she could use as evidence to disprove the accusation. She spoke with several of her classmates, including Sofia and Santiago, who were willing to testify in her favor if necessary. She also started documenting her interactions with Miss Johnson, taking detailed notes of every word the teacher said to her in class. She knew that every detail could be crucial if the situation escalated to a point of no return. Finally, after several days of tension, the moment Anna had been dreading arrived. Her father called her into his office on a Friday afternoon, after the last class of the day. "Anna, tomorrow there's a meeting with the school board," Daniel said, with a grave look. "They want you to be present. Miss Johnson will formally present her complaint, but you'll have the chance to defend yourself." Anna felt the nervousness take hold of her, but she had no other choice. She would have to face Miss Johnson head-on and prove the accusations were false. The day of the meeting arrived, and Anna, accompanied by her father, walked into the school's conference room. Several members of the school board were already seated around a long table, waiting for the meeting to begin. Miss Johnson was there too, with a cold and distant expression. Anna looked directly into her eyes, not lowering her gaze. She knew this would be one of the most difficult moments of her life. One of the board members began speaking, calling the meeting to order. "We are here to hear the complaint from Professor Johnson and the responses from the student Ana Garcia. Professor, you may begin." Miss Johnson stood up with a calmness that made Anna uneasy. The teacher spoke slowly, recounting her version of events with calculated precision. She described Anna as a problematic student, insinuating that she had incited others to disobey and sabotage the classroom environment. Ana Garcia has shown a defiant attitude from the beginning, Miss Johnson said, looking at Ana coldly. And I fear her negative influence is beginning to affect other students. When she finished speaking, there was a silence in the room. All eyes turned to Ana, waiting for her response. Ana stood up, her heart pounding, but with a determination she hadn't felt before. None of what she said is true, Ana began, her voice clear and firm. I haven't organized any protest, nor have I incited my classmates to disobey. I only tried to participate in class discussions like any other student, but Miss Johnson isn't interested in hearing perspectives that differ from hers. Anna's gaze swept the room. She knew what she was about to say was risky, but she had no other choice. This isn't about a behavior issue. This is about not being allowed to speak about racism in a space where I should be free to express myself. Miss Johnson has repeatedly interrupted and discredited me just for sharing my opinions on a topic that is important to me and to many others. The silence that followed was deafening. Ana knew she had planted the seed of doubt. The truth was on the table, and now it was up to the school board to interpret the facts. The tension in the room was palpable. Ana remained standing, watching the school board members as they processed her words. She could feel the weight of their stares on her, but she stayed firm. Miss Johnson, seated at the other end of the table, looked at her with an expression that was hard to decipher. Ana knew the teacher hadn't expected her to defend herself with such determination, but Ana wouldn't be intimidated. One of the board members, a man with gray hair and thin glasses, leaned forward, reviewing the documents in front of him. The room stayed silent as his fingers tapped the table slowly, as if he was thinking about how to proceed. Miss Garcia, he finally began, what you're presenting is very serious. You are accusing a teacher with years of experience of intentionally silencing you because of the topic of racism. That's a delicate matter, and we need concrete proof to evaluate these allegations. Ana nodded, already prepared for this question. She had spent the last few days gathering as much information as she could, and now it was time to use it. I understand that my words alone aren't enough, Ana said calmly. That's why I spoke with several of my classmates, who are willing to testify about what they've seen and heard in class. Additionally, I've taken detailed notes of my interactions with Miss Johnson, documenting every time I was interrupted or discredited without justification. I also have copies of the essays and assignments I've submitted, where my grades were lower without a clear explanation. The board member's eyes narrowed as Ana pulled a thick folder from her backpack. She placed the folder on the table in front of him, and several other board members glanced at it with interest. Several students can corroborate that, on more than one occasion, Miss Johnson interrupted me when I tried to participate in discussions. And this isn't just my perception, but something other classmates have noticed as well, Ana continued, keeping her composure as she looked around the room. I've never been disrespectful. I've only tried to share my point of view on the topics we've been discussing, but it seems that any mention of racism or social injustices was immediately shut down by the teacher. Miss Johnson, who had been silent during Anna's presentation, finally raised her hand to speak. Her expression was severe, but controlled. With all due respect, Miss Johnson began, addressing the board and not Anna, Miss Garcia has misunderstood my actions. My intention was never to silence her, but simply to guide the discussion so it wouldn't veer off into topics that might be uncomfortable for other students. At no point did I mean to disrespect her. Ana pressed her lips together, holding back the urge to respond immediately. She knew what Miss Johnson was doing, manipulating the situation, framing her behavior as merely keeping the class in order. But Anna wouldn't be fooled. "I understand that not all topics are easy to discuss, but that doesn't mean we should avoid talking about them," Anna said, looking directly at the teacher. "Racism is a fundamental part of the novel we were studying, and pretending it has no relevance today is denying a reality that many people, including myself, face every day." The room fell silent again. The school board members exchanged glances, assessing what had been said. Anna knew she had done everything she could to defend her position, but now her future was in the hands of others. The board president, a burly man with a deep voice, called for a short recess. As the board members left the room to deliberate in private, Anna sank into her chair, feeling the wave of nerves finally release. She knew the verdict could go either way, but at least she had stood up for her truth. Miss Johnson exited the room without looking at her. Despite her calm exterior, Anna could sense a tension in her steps, as if she too was grappling with her own fears. Daniel, her father, stayed by her side the whole time. He offered a small but comforting smile. "You did a good job, Anna. I'm proud of you," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Whatever they decide, you should know that you defended your point of view with dignity." Anna nodded, grateful for her father's unwavering support. She knew it wasn't easy for him to be in this position, but his presence made her feel less alone in the midst of this storm. Minutes passed. Anna wondered what was happening in the deliberation room. Each passing second heightened her anxiety, but she tried to focus on staying calm. She knew she had done everything in her power. Finally, the board members returned, their expressions serious. The president took his seat at the head of the table, his voice resonating with authority as everyone returned to their places. "After reviewing the evidence presented and hearing the testimonies, we have reached a decision. We acknowledge that there were communication failures in the classroom, and that certain interactions may have been misinterpreted. However, we have not found sufficient evidence to support the claim that Miss Garcia was organizing a protest against Professor Johnson." A wave of relief surged through Anna's body. "That said," the president continued, "we believe this situation requires further attention and oversight. Additional support will be provided in the classroom to ensure that all students have the opportunity to fully participate in discussions. A more detailed review of Ms. Garcia's evaluations will also be conducted to ensure there has been no bias in her grading." Anna felt a mix of relief and a small spark of victory. She had managed to make her voice heard. While the board hadn't taken drastic action against Miss Johnson, they hadn't left her completely unscathed either. They had acknowledged that something was wrong, and for Anna, that was already a step in the right direction. The board rose to close the session, and Anna walked out of the room alongside her father. As they walked down the hallway, she felt a new lightness in her step. Though she knew the battle with Miss Johnson wasn't completely over, for the first time, she felt like she wasn't fighting alone. In the days following the school board meeting, there was a noticeable shift at school. Though Anna knew that Miss Johnson hadn't been directly sanctioned, the fact that the board had taken steps to monitor her classroom was a small triumph. Anna knew that this change hadn't come easily and that while the teacher would maintain her control over the class, she could no longer act with complete impunity. The first sign that things were changing came during the next literature class. When Anna entered the classroom, she noticed a new observer, Mrs. Mendoza, one of the school's academic coordinators. She sat in the back of the class, notebook in hand, ready to take notes. Miss Johnson barely glanced at her, but Anna could see the tension in her body. The teacher knew her behavior was being monitored, and that meant she couldn't act with total freedom anymore. During the lesson, Miss Johnson maintained a professional tone, but her eyes frequently darted to the back of the room. It was clear she was carefully measuring each word she spoke, making sure not to make any mistakes under Mrs. Mendoza's watchful eye. Anna, though calmer, knew this wouldn't be a permanent solution. Miss Johnson was cunning, and she would find ways to regain control if allowed. The atmosphere among Anna's classmates had also shifted. Though there were still glances and whispers, some students began to approach her more. Santiago, as always, greeted her with a knowing smile, and Sophia was no longer the only one who stayed to chat with her after class. Laura, the same girl who had once supported Miss Johnson's ideas, now seemed more open to discussing the topics Anna had raised. One afternoon, as they were packing up their things after class, she approached Anna. "Anna, I've been thinking about what you said the other day, about how racism is still a part of reality for many people," Laura said, her expression more serious than usual. "I didn't fully understand what you meant at first, but now I think you're right. Not all of us experience it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist." Anna looked at her with a mix of surprise and gratitude. Laura was one of the most popular students in class, and having her on her side could make a big difference. "I'm glad you see it that way, Laura. It's not easy to talk about these things, but I think it's necessary," Anna said, smiling. Laura nodded before saying goodbye and leaving the classroom. Anna watched her go, feeling more optimistic than ever. Little by little, her classmates were beginning to understand that her words weren't an attack, but an invitation to reflect on a reality she lived every day. Despite these small advances, Anna knew that the real test would come with time. Miss Johnson hadn't changed her attitude toward her, she had simply learned to hide her resentment better. The teacher remained cold and impersonal when addressing Anna in class, but she no longer interrupted or discredited her openly. Even so, the tension between them was evident, and Anna had to stay vigilant. One afternoon, while Anna was studying in the library, Sophia hurried over to her. "Anna, you need to see this," Sophia said urgently, handing her the phone. Anna took the device and looked at the screen. It was a screenshot of a group chat between some students from their class. In the messages, they were discussing a secret meeting they were planning to figure out how to challenge Miss Johnson's classes without getting caught. The idea seemed to come from a small group determined to resist the teacher's authority, but it didn't necessarily involve Anna. "Did you know about this?" Sophia asked, worried. Anna shook her head, feeling a mix of confusion and fear. She hadn't organized anything, but she knew that if Miss Johnson found out about this group, she would somehow try to link her to the rebellion. "I have nothing to do with this," Anna responded, handing the phone back to Sophia. "But if Miss Johnson finds out, she's going to try to blame me again." Sophia nodded, concern reflected in her eyes. "You need to be careful, Anna. Some people are playing with fire, and I don't want them to drag you down with them." Anna knew this. She had already gone through a difficult process to clear her name and prove she wasn't organizing any protest. But now, this group of students seemed determined to challenge Miss Johnson in a much more direct way. The situation was becoming dangerous again, and Anna had to be very careful. That same afternoon, she decided to talk to her father. She knew she couldn't sit by while rumors started to circulate again. "Dad, something's going on with some of my classmates," Anna said as she sat in front of him in the living room. "They're planning some sort of resistance against Miss Johnson, but I have nothing to do with it. I'm afraid that if word gets out, they're going to try to involve me again." Daniel frowned, clearly worried by what he was hearing. "You did the right thing by telling me, Anna," he replied. "We'll handle this very carefully. We can't let them accuse you of something you didn't do again." That night, Anna slept little, her mind filled with thoughts about what might come next. She knew she had to tread carefully, but she also knew she couldn't control her classmates' actions. And if something went wrong, the suspicions would fall back on her. The following days were a mix of calm and latent tension. Classes continued as usual, but Anna could feel that something was about to erupt. The students involved in the rebellious group were becoming more open in their criticism of Miss Johnson, and though Anna tried to stay out of it, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Finally, one afternoon, everything fell apart. In the middle of a literature lesson, one of the students from the rebel group, Marco, abruptly stood up and, without warning, launched a direct criticism at Miss Johnson. "Why do we keep ignoring the important topics?" Marco shouted, interrupting the class. "You always avoid talking about the things that really matter, as if you want us to stay silent." Miss Johnson gave him a cold stare. The classroom fell into an absolute silence. "Marco, sit down right now," the teacher ordered, her voice filled with authority. But Marco didn't obey. "I'm not going to stay quiet. This classroom should be a space where we can speak freely, but you just want to control what we say." Chaos erupted in the room. Some students began murmuring to each other, while others sat silently, wide-eyed. Anna, sitting in her place, felt her heart racing. She knew that even though she had nothing to do with what was happening, this situation would drag her back into the conflict. Miss Johnson, her face tense, turned toward the door. "I'm going to speak to Principal Morales." "This won't stand," she said and stormed out of the classroom, leaving everyone in a state of shock. Anna knew the storm was coming, and she had no idea how she was going to come out of it without being pulled back in again. The classroom atmosphere was tense. Miss Johnson had left in a fury, and the students exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do next. Marco, still standing, seemed to have lost some of his boldness after witnessing the teacher's reaction. Everything he had built with his rebellious speech now hung by a thread, and the anticipation of what would happen next held everyone in suspense. Anna remained still in her seat, her heart racing. She knew that Marco's and the rebellious group's actions would soon have consequences, and although she hadn't participated, something told her that somehow, she would be dragged back into the conflict. She decided she couldn't just stand by and watch things spiral out of control, but she also knew that if she acted now, it could make things worse. The minutes passed slowly. Students began whispering among themselves, speculating about what would happen when Miss Johnson returned with the principal. The feeling that something inevitable was about to happen gripped the room, as if everything that had been building for weeks was finally about to explode. Finally, the classroom door opened again. This time, not only Miss Johnson entered but also Daniel Morales, Anna's father, and the school principal. Seeing them, the room fell into complete silence. The expression on her father's face was serious, but when their eyes met, Anna saw a slight hint of concern. Daniel walked to the front of the classroom, with Miss Johnson by his side, who maintained a tense expression. The students stayed in their seats, anxiously waiting for what would happen next. "I've been informed about what just happened here," Daniel said, his voice firm but calm. "This behavior is unacceptable under any circumstances. Interrupting a class like this is a grave disrespect to both the teacher and your classmates. We are here to learn, and this kind of behavior cannot be tolerated." Daniel's eyes scanned the room before stopping at Marco, who now looked visibly nervous. The young man tried to speak, but the words seemed stuck in his throat. Daniel raised a hand, indicating it wasn't time to respond yet. I understand that some of you have concerns about how certain topics are being handled in class, and I am always willing to listen to those concerns, but this is not the right way to do it. If you have something to say, there are respectful and constructive ways to do so. The classroom remained completely silent. Anna knew her father was walking a very fine line. As principal, he had to maintain discipline, but he also understood that the atmosphere in this class was part of a deeper conflict. Daniel looked at the students again. There will be consequences for what happened today, he continued. I will speak with Marco after this class to discuss appropriate actions. But I also want you all to know that we are working to ensure this classroom is a space where everyone feels heard and respected. Miss Johnson is here to teach you, and you are here to learn. That is the agreement we must all respect. With those words, Daniel turned to Miss Johnson, who seemed satisfied with the direction the events had taken so far. Anna noticed the slight smile on the teacher's face, as if she believed she had won a small victory. Now, Miss Johnson will resume the class. I ask that you continue with your studies, Daniel said before leaving the classroom. Silence returned as Miss Johnson took her place at the front. Anna could feel that things wouldn't be the same. The tension was still there, but the open confrontation seemed to be over, at least for now. The class dragged on slowly. Although Miss Johnson tried to continue the lesson, the atmosphere was oppressive, and all the students were distracted. Anna couldn't stop thinking about what would happen next. She knew this wasn't the end, that the struggle with Miss Johnson still had more chapters to be written. When the bell rang, the students hurriedly left the classroom. Anna quietly gathered her things, but before she could leave, Miss Johnson called her. Anna, I need to speak with you, the teacher said, her tone cold but controlled. Anna felt a pang of anxiety but slowly turned to face her. She knew this was bound to happen sooner or later. Miss Johnson watched her for a few seconds before speaking, carefully choosing each word. I know you weren't part of what happened today, she finally said. But I want to make something clear. What happened in this classroom isn't just about Marco or what he said. There's an atmosphere of defiance that's been building here, and I know you've been at the center of many of the discussions about the topics we've covered. Anna stayed silent, waiting for the teacher to finish. I'll just say this, be careful. Things can get out of control quickly, and I don't want to see you dragged back into something you may not be able to control. Anna felt a mix of anger and frustration at those words. It was clear that Miss Johnson still saw her as a threat, someone who could destabilize her authority in the classroom. But instead of directly confronting her, the teacher was opting for a veil. I understand, Anna replied, her voice calm. But I also want you to know that I won't stay silent when something isn't right. Talking about racism and inequality isn't defiance. It's necessary. Miss Johnson didn't respond immediately. She seemed to be evaluating what Anna had said, as if considering her next move. Finally, the teacher gave a slight nod. As I said, be careful, was all she said before turning to organize her papers. Anna left the classroom feeling exhausted, but also more determined than ever. She knew that Miss Johnson's warning was just another attempt to intimidate her, but she no longer felt like the insecure girl who had first walked into that classroom. She had learned to raise her voice, to fight for what she believed in, and though the battle with Miss Johnson wasn't over, she knew she wasn't alone. The next day, when Anna returned to school, things had subtly changed. Marco was called to the principal's office for a disciplinary conversation, but the atmosphere in the classroom was different. The students who had once remained silent now seemed more interested in the topics Anna had brought to the conversation. Even those who hadn't always agreed with her, like Laura and Santiago, now seemed more willing to listen and participate. The silent resistance Anna had begun, at first unintentionally, had turned into something more. Miss Johnson could still maintain her control, but Anna knew she had opened a door. The conversations that once seemed impossible were now happening, and though the road ahead was long, she had started walking it with At the end of the day, as she left school, Anna smiled to herself. She knew that important battles are never won immediately, but each small victory, each voice that joined hers, was a step toward true change. And she was ready to keep moving forward, no matter how many obstacles she encountered along the way. IRM Steps. D Warning. I hope you enjoyed this emotional and uplifting story. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and leave a comment below to tell me what you thought. I'd love to hear your opinion. Also, don't leave without watching the video that's showing up on the end screen. I'm sure you'll love it too. See you next time.